introduce the question.
Thanks, Lascan Corla. Well, Minister, as you know, I've raised the issue of the oppression, the savage oppression of the Kurdish nation and people in Turkey with you, I think, on maybe 7-8 occasions since you become Minister. And in July, as you know, this oppression has intensified with mass arrests of journalists, soldiers, police officers, 120,000 civil servants of all kinds, judges, 28 democratically elected mayors, the destruction of cities, the oppression of the language and the culture of the Kurdish people in Turkey, and I'd like to know what you're going to do about it in conjunction with your EU colleagues.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Taking 31 and 45 and 51 and 53 together, Lascan Corla, I wish to assure the deputies that I have repeatedly stated my serious concerns about the deteriorating situation in Turkey since the attempted coup on July the 15th. My most recent statement of the 4th of November expressed my deep concern at the arrest of the two co-chairs of the pro-Kurdish HDP and several of its elected members of Parliament, as well as the intensified media crackdown. I've clearly stated Ireland's position at the Foreign Affairs Council and at the Council of Europe, where I engaged directly with the Turkish Foreign Minister. My officials have drawn my statement to the attention of the Turkish Embassy here in Dublin. I've highlighted the need for a proportionate and measured response by the Turkish authorities and the importance of upholding the core European values of democracy, respect for rule of law, freedom of expression, including media freedom, the rights of minorities and other fundamental freedoms. Ireland fully agrees with the statements by the European Union that there is no place for a country which reintroduces the death penalty within the European Union. In a strong statement issued on the 8th of November, the European Union was critical of Turkey's recent actions and the direction of recent developments, called once again for the resumption of political dialogue with the Kurds. I've also repeatedly called for a return to dialogue to allow the political process to resolve the Kurdish issue to resume, as did my colleague Minister Darragh Murphy during an extensive debate which took place on Turkey at the most recent meeting of the EU Foreign Affairs Council on the 14th of November. My officials met last week with members of the pro-Kurdish opposition HDP party, as did a number of deputies across the House. The HDP representatives presented the most stark case, in particular on the circumstances surrounding the detention of the democratically elected representative from Kurdish areas. The restrictions, as has been stated by Deputy Broughan, the restrictions on the Kurdish media and the very negative impact of on the daily lives of large numbers of the Kurdish population. The European Commission published its annual report on Turkey on the 9th of November. The report is critical of Turkey on the core issues, the rule of law and fundamental rights, outlines backsliding in these areas. The report will be discussed at the December meeting of the EU General Affairs Council. The EU and its member states, including Ireland, are keeping the situation in Turkey under close review in the light of the recent most negative trends. The European Union is considering how best to influence Turkey and to encourage a commitment to the return of democratic norms and respect in Turkey for basic freedoms. At the same time, Ireland believes that it's important to keep the lines of communication open with Turkey, that we must try to hold open the long-term European perspective for all the people of Turkey. I'm scheduled to meet with the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Niels Misnieks, later this week. We'll discuss with him his views on the path to take in terms of the commitments of Turkey and as members of the Council of Europe. The EU-Turkey deal agreed between EU heads of state and government and Turkey in March 2016 is not affected by recent events. Turkey continues to play a key role in addressing the migration crisis. The core intention of the agreement between Turkey and EU heads of state and government was to break the business model of the people smugglers, who are profiting from the suffering of vulnerable migrants. It's particularly aimed to discourage the victims of people smugglers from risking their lives crossing the Aegean Sea. The most significant decline in the number of people attempting to cross the Aegean Sea from Turkey to the Greek islands since the agreement entered into force suggests that in many respects it's achieving its aims.
First supplementary is from Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. And Minister, yeah, we were to meet Deputy Faisal, I think, Sari Yildiz, who couldn't travel from Brussels. But I'm grateful that your department has met with the Kurdish Solidarity Group, and that hopefully those the conflict resolution unit, I think, which you told me before, is interested in this. That those contacts will continue. Could I just ask you? I mean, would you agree? The European Parliament, I think, is voting today on the suspension of all talks on chapters of accession with Turkey. Would you agree with that? Would you now come out and say that we should suspend talks with the Turkish government, as I've outlined very briefly, the savage oppression of the people of the Kurdish area? The savage oppression of the people of the Kurdish area of Turkey continues. You mentioned yourself the return of the death penalty and the absolute refusal of the AKP party to allow the rights of the HDP representing the Kurdish people. And just very briefly, finally, what steps could you take to ensure that the peace process, which was well underway in 2013, and which I think Abdullah Öcalan, the leader of the the Kurdish people, was anxious to progress. What can you do to bring that back? Thanks to her. Or less can.
The Deputy raises a number of issues, and I wish to assure him that I will continue to call on all parties to engage in constructive dialogue. Ireland shares the concern about the situation in Turkey. I note Deputy Broughan's comment about members of the European Parliament and the issue of resolution. The resolution calls on the European Union to suspend accession talks with Turkey in response to the ongoing crackdown on fundamental freedoms and actions. I believe that the prospect of a European perspective will ultimately be of benefit to the people of Turkey. It will offer them a democratic future. It will offer them a rule of law of a type which I believe everybody in this House agrees to be of importance and of advantage to the people of Turkey. But I also believe that it's important that we keep all channels of communication open at what is a most sensitive time. And I believe that the cutting off or the cessation of relations in the matter of contact is not in the best interest of the Turkish people. And I believe it's important that we continue to engage and that we retain open channels of communication at this very difficult and challenging time.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Minister, like others, I did meet the Turkish delegation and had hoped to meet the Kurdish Member of Parliament, but that wasn't to be. I think it's very disconcerting that what we're seeing is the imprisonment of democratically elected members of Parliament. We've also seen the removal of democratically elected mayors in Kurdish regions, as was pointed out to us by the group. They also showed us pictures of a number of Kurdish villages that had been destroyed by the Turkish military, and it was actually like looking at scenes from Aleppo. But this is an issue that's just not getting the media coverage, the attention that it should be getting. You did mention something in your reply about engagement with the embassy here, and I was just wondering, have you had a response from the Turkish ambassador? And while we can say that the EU is critical, etc., that doesn't translate into action, and I agree with you about keeping the lines of communication open, but are we strong enough on this about the attack on democracy in Turkey?
Minister.
My officials keep in ongoing and continuous contact with representatives of the Turkish government here in this state, and I have repeatedly called for a resumption of dialogue to allow the political process on the Kurdish issue to resume. The escalation of violence, as referred to by Deputy O'Sullivan, since the breakdown of the ceasefire between the Turkish government and the PKK in the summer of last year, continues to be a cause of serious concern. Breakdown was all the more regrettable, given that there were positive signs that progress had been made during the course of the talks. So Ireland continues to be a strong advocate for peace talks between the Turkish government and the PKK. I point to the work that we do on the matter of the conflict resolution unit of my Department of Foreign Affairs, the financial assistance that has been provided to international NGO, which has facilitated study visits to Ireland by Turkish and Kurdish MPs, the fact that there was the dialogue, as referred to by the Deputy and others, only last week. We will continue to advocate and work for a lasting peace in the region.
Next question from Deputy Dara.
Yeah, I did mention earlier on in priority questions, Ara, the situation with regard to Turkey that my colleagues have outlined. I do believe it is time now for Ireland to extricate itself from the EU-Turkey arrangement. You can't stand over. The Turkish government have used the coup as an opportunity and post the coup to shore up and consolidate their power there. The attacks on the Kurds, the attacks on the free press, on opposition members of Parliament, these are things that we shouldn't countenance as a free and open society here. And I think our part in the EU-Turkey migration deal is something that I've regularly raised with you. We don't have oversight as to how the 20.9 million is being spent, and effectively the reason why the EU won't suspend accession talks for Turkey to the EU is because the EU needs Turkey to deal with the migration crisis that's happening. So I think we need to speak with a louder voice on this, Minister. I do understand, as Deputy O'Sullivan has mentioned, to keep the channels of communication open, but Ireland is an independent state, and Ireland can state our position and the Dáil's position. We don't have to take the EU lead on everything.
Ireland continues to support the eventual accession of Turkey to the European Union. We have been clear that all the benchmarks, all the conditions, all the criteria in this process must be fully met, and indeed there must be no shortcuts as far as accession is concerned. Rule of law, fundamental rights, particularly freedom of expression, freedom of the media, minority rights and democracy, are core elements of the process of accession. The European Commission published its report on the state of play in all candidate and potential candidate countries on the 9th of this month. The report on Turkey is clear, it's critical, it highlights the deterioration of human rights and also in the matter of fundamental freedoms. It also acknowledges Turkey's positive contribution in terms of the migration crisis. Ireland's view, I repeat it, I said it earlier, I believe it's important. If we are to make progress, the channels of communication should be kept open at all levels within the established framework, and that includes the accession process. It provides the hope of a long-term European perspective for the people of Turkey, which, in the circumstances, is very important.
Deputy Broughan, could I make a suggestion if the three deputies have supplementaries that you might ask the questions and get the substantive answer?
Yeah.
Because I'm hoping to take another question.
Okay, that's great. Well, just very briefly, Minister, I mean, I think it is utterly outrageous that the European Union is remotely considering admitting a country engaged in such horrendous oppression, you know, where almost 200 children have been killed, where cities and towns have been razed to the ground and so on. It beggars belief. And it also is a problem, I think, for us that Germany has a conflicted interest here, having made the deal, the refugee deal, and paying large sums of money to Turkey. And at the same time, it was Germany, above all, that refused again and again to allow Turkey to proceed into the European Union. You know, so there's a total hypocrisy here at the heart of it. So I call on you again to say quite clearly, you know, what's happening here is anathema to us. The peace process must resume. The rights of the Kurdish nation must be upheld, and hopefully someday Kurdistan, all of Kurdistan, you know, will have a parliament like this for its nation. Thanks, Caherla.
Deputy O'Sullivan.
Progress has been made in 2013 on building peace, but it says something for a regime that one of their targets is teachers, and they've arrested thousands of teachers, and so denying Turkish and Kurdish children the right to education. And I just want to quote from Oxfam: "The EU needs to reconsider very carefully exactly how much it is willing to sacrifice on the altar of migration, and we are trusting Turkey to deal with refugees in a respectful, in a humane way when the Turkish military are bombing Kurdish villages and causing so much death and destruction."
Brian, short supplementary.
Yeah, Minister, to ask you again, do you not see a paradox or a contradiction in Europe and the EU, and by extension Ireland, supporting the EU migration deal, and at the same time calling for those same countries, i.e. Turkey, to abide by human rights law and ensuring that refugee rights are upheld. So on the one hand, we're saying to Turkey, critical reports within the European Union, human rights abuses, attacks on minorities, closing down the free press, all of these things. Yet on the other side of things, we're actually saying, well, it's okay to send refugees and migrants to what's supposedly a safe haven. That doesn't stack up. There's an absolute contradiction in that approach.
Well, I wish to assure the House that the European Union and Turkey have been working for many months on the matter of the appalling migrant crisis. As the Deputy will be aware, Turkey is now hosting in excess of 2.7 million migrants. It's an enormous number for any country, and Ireland, like our EU colleagues, are committed to finding a solution to this the most serious issue. However, I'd have to acknowledge, Lascan Corda, listening to some of the deputies, one might be excused for forming the view that an imminent accession a conclusion to the current issue is likely. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. There is no question of Turkey gaining admission to the European Union until such time as all of the strict criteria, conditions, obligations are met. But I just want to say, Ceann Comhairle, that it's absolutely essential in the context of what has happened in Turkey over the summer months, that the core principles of democracy, including human rights, must be protected in Turkey. And I urge once again the Turkish authorities to revert to ordinary procedures and safeguards as early as possible. And I will have an opportunity of engaging with the European Commission on this precise issue before the end of this week.
Question 30.